bankruptcy reorganization plans. In the case of Chrysler, it went to the federal appeals court, and as Steve said, the Supreme Court. So the courts did rule on the bankruptcy.
Not on the process. On the bankruptcy itself, not on the process.
Well, sure they did. I mean, there were plenty of people, like you, who said this is not proper. And the bankruptcy court in New York, I was there. They upheld the process.
They uphold the idea. They didn't uphold the process of who gets paid first, who gets paid second.
The only thing you could be referring to is that there has been a post-Chrysler bankruptcy court judge did suggest that the Chrysler bankruptcy does not have precedential value. I mean, there have been courts that have questioned the rulings. You're certainly right about that. But in the case of GM and Chrysler, the courts did uphold that. In terms of waivers, the only waiver I can think of is that Treasury did change the rules for allowing new GM and new Chrysler to retain the deferred tax losses from the old company.
And kept the union contracts.
Well, you want to?
Look, first, that change in using tax losses, I think, was for any company,
right.
not just for an auto company. It was done because there were a lot of companies in this position at the time, and Treasury was trying to help. Again, part of the restructuring of the American economy, frankly. But I honestly have no idea what you're talking about when you say Secretary Geithner issued waiver after waiver. There were no waivers.
There were several.
Okay, well, you and I can disagree about that. I was there. I don't think you were, and there were no waivers. So I don't.
Geithner would disagree, but go ahead.
Well, why don't we have him come here one day and we can.
All right, we're going to do question and response.
Anyway,
so now we're in the response.
Let me go on to the other thing. On the million jobs thing, the Center for Auto Research developed that number. They're an independent body in Michigan. In the case of Chrysler, when we were trying to decide whether to save Chrysler or not, we did some work on how many jobs would be lost if just Chrysler went down. And our answer was 300,000. And that may seem like a lot, considering that Chrysler itself, I think, employed about 40,000 people at the time. But you have to consider all the dealers, you have to consider all the suppliers, you have to consider all the other effects. Now, I would concede that over time, and this is the point I think that people who think we should have just completely stayed out make, over time the industry would have kind of regenerated itself. If you cut a bunch of branches off a tree, it'll grow some new branches eventually, but it takes a very long time. And so I believe, and I think our view was, that the million job figure that Center for Auto Research produced was a pretty reasonable first estimate of the primary effect of what would happen.
And remember, the Bush administration and President Bush cited that same million job figure.
He was wrong too.
You could argue whether that is too high, but that number would have included Ford liquidating because they shared so many suppliers with GM and Chrysler, and all of the tens of billions of dollars of economic impact. I mean, GM spends $20 billion on parts alone. If those companies aren't spending all that money in the economy, it's going to have a huge aggregate impact on employment. So, there have been other estimates that it was 1.5 million, or maybe it was 800,000, but certainly nobody can argue that if the industry had collapsed, it would not have had a huge impact on employment.